August 1999, the largest earthquake in Turkey's history strikes near Istanbul. Thousands are killed, hundreds of buildings collapse. But amidst the destruction and rubble, an ancient wonder remains standing, Hagia Sophia. Scientists unlock the secrets of Hagia Sophia's 1,500 years of miraculous survival. And high-tech computer models predict whether it can withstand the next killer quake. For 1,500 years, the dome atop the Church of Hagia Sophia has soared above the skyline of Istanbul. For the first 800 of those years, Hagia Sophia was the largest dome building in the world. How big is it? If you put wheels on the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris and took off its bell tower, you could roll it inside Hagia Sophia. That this wonder of the ancient world still stands is remarkable. But when you consider where it stands, it becomes miraculous. At the intersection where two continents, Europe and Asia, collide, is Turkey. Istanbul, once the ancient city of Constantinople, is at ground zero in one of the most deadly earthquake zones on Earth. Since the beginning of recorded history, 4,000 years ago, the city has been periodically hit by a series of massive earthquakes. But while buildings around it have toppled, Hagia Sophia and its amazing dome have survived 15 centuries of devastation. Is this by chance or by design? Dr. Ahmet Çakmak of Princeton University is searching every inch of the revered structure, desperately seeking to answer that question. Seismic experts warn that the big quake of August 1999 may soon generate another, even bigger quake. Will Hagia Sophia finally crumble? Using sophisticated computer models, Çakmak is hunting for the engineering secrets that have protected Hagia Sophia for a millennium and a half. Does Hagia Sophia hold the answers to its own survival? Can scientists unlock the secrets of this mystical structure before another city-busting quake hits Istanbul? The quest to understand Hagia Sophia's miraculous survival begins with knowing why the enormous edifice was originally built. Art historian Joan Branham says Hagia Sophia was constructed at the time of one of the greatest crossroads in history: the fall of the Roman Empire and the rise of the Byzantine Empire.
The Byzantine Empire finds its roots actually in the Roman Empire, where the first Christian Roman emperor, Constantine, moves the capital from Rome to a city called Byzantium in the 4th century. This city then is renamed the city of Constantine, Constantinople.
200 years later, the Byzantine Empire would reach its zenith under the power of the greatest of all Byzantine emperors, Justinian. Justinian conquered lands from Spain to the Middle East, ordaining the Byzantine Empire as the rightful successor to the mighty Roman Empire. Justinian ruled over this vast territory by combining the secular military power of the Roman Empire with the spiritual fervor of the new religion sweeping the ancient world. Christianity. In 300 years, Christians went from being fed to the lions to sitting on the emperor's throne. Justinian embraced Christianity as the state religion and needed a commanding symbol of this new world order.
Justinian wanted the capital of Constantinople to be not only the new Rome, but also the new Jerusalem. In order to do this, he needed to build a structure as magnificent as possible. And here it is, Hagia Sophia, the ultimate symbol of his power and his faith. It would become the new Jerusalem, the new temple on earth.
To achieve this lofty goal, Justinian invented an entirely new house of worship. Until Hagia Sophia, Christian churches, like these ruins of St. Studius in ancient Constantinople, were of the basilica form, or rectangular.
The most commonly used architectural form in the early Christian period was the basilica, a rectangular formed building that was longer than it was wide, and it ended in a hemispherical projection called an apse.
Because most early churches were basilicas, the rectangular form symbolized the spirituality of Christianity. In contrast, the dome was associated with secular power. The most celebrated building of the ancient world, the Pantheon in Rome, with its magnificent dome, was the ultimate symbol of state power. Justinian's mission was to merge these two worlds, the secular and religious. His order was to combine their two symbols, the circle and the square, into one never-before imagined building. To fulfill the emperor's dream, Justinian summoned the two brightest minds in his empire.
Emperor Justinian, the greatest Byzantine emperor of all time, commissioned this church to be built by two of the most famous architects of his day, Anthemius of Tralles and Isidorus of Miletus. These two possible Nobel Prize winners of their day have no representation of what they look like and what they did.
What the architects faced was a seemingly impossible challenge: turn a square into a circle. Roman architects had been struggling unsuccessfully for decades, trying to put a round dome on top of a square structure. The Pantheon's round dome on its round base was thought to be the only way to build a dome. But Justinian was determined to put a round dome of state power on the square base of a Christian church. To make the task even more challenging, he wanted his church and dome to be the biggest the world had ever seen.
The accomplishment of this task at a scale of the Church of Hagia Sophia leaves Anthemius with a very significant engineering problem.
To solve the problem of the circle in the square, Anthemius and Isidorus would have to invent entirely new architectural elements. But they began with the old workhorse of Roman architecture, the arch. The architects planned to support the dome on 4 huge arches. Because all its pieces are pressing against each other, an arch supports itself.
An arch stands up because every piece of it is in compression. When you remove the keystone, this compression is gone and the arch collapses.
Surprisingly, it's not the weight of the dome that's the problem. It's the weight of the arch. An arch's span is limited by the weight of the materials that create its curving form. If the architects were going to build a gigantic dome, first they would have to find a way to build bigger arches.
In order to build a big dome, one needs to build a big arch, but the span of the arch is limited by its weight. As the weight of the arch presses down on it, it deforms horizontally. In order to solve this problem, Anthemius built 2 massive piers and placed the arch within those piers. Now, as its weight presses down, the piers restrained its horizontal motion.
The architects arrived at a completely novel solution. 4 huge piers, each one measuring over 2,000 square feet at its base, would provide support for the arches. With the arches buttressed by the piers, Anthemius had devised a structure that was capable of supporting the dome. Now he could tackle the seemingly insurmountable task of fitting the circular dome on the square base formed by the 4 arches. To solve this problem, he devised these triangular-shaped sections that fill in the gaps between the arches, an entirely new architectural element, the pendentive. Without the revolutionary pendentives, Hagia Sophia as we know it would not exist. The 4 curving pendentives round the corners of the square, making it a circle so the dome can fit on top. And the pendentives shore up the corners of the square, helping the arches and piers carry the weight of the dome. Finally, upon this carefully designed and engineered support structure, Anthemius would build the most awe-inspiring and distinctive feature of Hagia Sophia, the Great Dome. When completed, the dome's interior diameter of 108 feet made Hagia Sophia the largest dome building in the world. Hagia Sophia would hold this title for 1,000 years, until St. Peter's in Rome was built in the 1500s. From the floor of the church, the dome rises 180 feet. If the Statue of Liberty were placed inside Hagia Sophia, her torch would just barely graze the top of the dome. But it's at the base of the dome that Anthemius devised perhaps his most remarkable innovation. In Anthemius' study of the Pantheon in Rome, he noticed the dome's crushing weight forced the base of the dome to expand outward. This phenomenon, known as hoop stress, caused a series of large cracks, starting at the base of the Pantheon and creeping up the sides.
Anthemius realized that these cracks were caused by hoop stresses. In order to relax these stresses, he decided to place 40 windows in the base of the dome. This is genius that takes an engineering problem and changes into an aesthetic solution.
Strangely enough, interrupting the base of the dome with windows reduced the stress and risk of cracking. This structural solution results in a heavenly interplay of light.
The Byzantine visitor to this space was astounded by the impression of a massive dome resting on a base of light. And in fact, one 6th century writer, Procopius, states that the dome hovered as if suspended from heaven on a golden chain.
The Emperor Justinian was pleased with the effect. It took 10,000 workers less than 6 years to complete the building. In 537, when the doors of Hagia Sophia were opened, Justinian believed he had built the most magnificent building on earth.
A 9th century document tells us that upon the completion of Hagia Sophia, Justinian walked through these doors and exclaimed, "Solomon, I have surpassed you."
By linking himself to Solomon, the builder of the greatest ancient temple, Justinian elevated himself to biblical heights. A mosaic in the church shows him presenting Hagia Sophia to the Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus. And what a magnificent gift it was. But when Justinian's masterpiece was complete, the Byzantine treasury was empty. The emperor had spent 320,000 pounds of gold to build Hagia Sophia. In today's dollars, Hagia Sophia cost a staggering $1.8 billion, making it the most expensive building in history. Hagia Sophia was the crowning achievement of the previous 1,000 years of scientific knowledge and artistic expression.
The scientific knowledge that Anthemius and Isidorus brought to this structure was unprecedented and unparalleled. And it's significant, in fact, that the building is not dedicated to a saint or to a person in particular, but instead to Hagia Sophia, which in Greek means holy wisdom.
The wisdom of the architect Anthemius is revealed not only in the beauty of Hagia Sophia, but also by the miracle that it has survived in one of the world's most dangerous earthquake zones. During the last 100 years, earthquakes in Turkey have killed more than 60,000 people and destroyed dozens of towns. Hagia Sophia lies just 13 miles from one of the most active fault lines on Earth.
Turkey is located on what we call the Alpine Himalayan earthquake zone. This is the earthquake zone that's associated with young mountains and the mountain build-ups, and almost all earthquakes that takes place in this zone do take place under cities that are associated with great damage and the loss of life.
The seismic record shows that a series of major earthquakes has rocked the Istanbul region since biblical times. The last big quake struck Istanbul in August 1999. It measured approximately 7.5 on the Richter scale, about the same magnitude as the 1906 earthquake, which destroyed San Francisco. Seismic experts warn that the August 1999 quake may spark another major quake that will directly strike Istanbul.
The largest fault that's passing through Turkey is what we call the North Anatolian Fault, and it is an exact replica of the San Andreas Fault in California, and the earthquake hazards in Turkey and California are highly comparable to each other.
With a seismic record of destruction that extends back 4,000 years, and with countless buildings toppled all around it, why has Hagia Sophia not fallen? Dr. Çakmak believes Anthemius built Hagia Sophia to withstand earthquakes. Ancient records reveal that Anthemius studied seismic activity. At the time, builders believed the best protection from earthquakes was to build thick, heavy walls. But Anthemius realized these solid, rigid buildings were shaken apart by earthquakes. So he took a risk 1,500 years ahead of his time, deliberately trying a daring new building method.
What is unique about this building is that the architects, Anthemius and Isidorus, were aware of the damage that earthquakes could cause. And they tried to build a building that would resist earthquakes. The way they accomplished this was to make the building light and flexible, which is a very modern concept. Buildings in those days, to be made stronger, were made heavier and more massive.
Anthemius made Hagia Sophia light and flexible, not just with his design, but also by creating special building materials. He put a secret ingredient in the recipe for the mortar of Hagia Sophia: crushed brick.
The architect Anthemius crushes the brick into a powder, which he then mixes with lime, water, and sand to make a special mortar. This mortar is very strong in tensile strength.
The crushed brick makes the ancient mortar more tensile or flexible, in the same way that steel makes modern concrete more resilient. When Dr. Çakmak tested samples of the mortar, he found it still chemically active. That makes the mortar as strong now as it was the day it was mixed. Amazingly, the mortar has not deteriorated in 1,500 years. Not only were the building materials strong, they were also light. The bricks used in the dome were fired at lower temperatures, making them less dense and therefore lighter than regular bricks. That results in less weight bearing down on the supporting arches. Remarkably, the reduced weight also offers protection against earthquakes. By using lighter building materials, Anthemius was instinctively applying the physics formula, force equals mass times acceleration.
1,000 years before Newton, Anthemius had an intuitive idea of the concept of force equals mass times acceleration. Although he could not control the accelerations that would come as a result of an earthquake, he could reduce the mass by reducing the weight of the building, thus reducing the impact the earthquake would have on the structure.
Because these quakes can come in series, another may strike Istanbul soon. Can Hagia Sophia remain standing? In 1992, Dr. Çakmak started searching for the structural secrets of Hagia Sophia's earthquake resistance. He began by placing sensors around the building at points he suspected would suffer the greatest stresses.
Then we had to wait for an earthquake to happen, which happened in the April of 1992. The data from this earthquake allowed us to calibrate the computer model so that it was ready to predict the behavior of Hagia Sophia under future earthquakes.
The seismic activity generated by the small earthquake produced enough data for the computer model to identify potential trouble spots. During an earthquake, the areas that flash red, particularly the tops of the 4 huge arches, would be subjected to tremendous pressures. These points would be the most likely places for a disastrous collapse to begin.
And what we can now do is to hit this model with a 7.5 magnitude earthquake and determine what kind of damage it will sustain, if any.
With a click of his computer mouse, Çakmak unleashes an earthquake equivalent in strength to the biggest quake ever to hit Istanbul. The walls of the virtual Hagia Sophia begin to tremble. The great structure is shaking. Its walls and the dome are swaying as they are struck by the violent seismic waves. The colors yellow, brown, and red pinpoint the areas under greatest strain. As the killer quake ends, the walls of the virtual Hagia Sophia are still standing. Amazingly, the dome resting on top is unharmed.
Our observations are that although certain sections of the building are stressed, none of the stresses exceed the allowable limits, and our prediction is that Hagia Sophia will survive a 7.5 magnitude earthquake.
Dr. Çakmak's prediction made in June 1999 proved to be deadly accurate. 2 months later, a magnitude 7.5 earthquake toppled buildings in Istanbul. Amazingly, Hagia Sophia remains standing, a testament to the genius of its architects.
Throughout centuries, various external modifications have been made to the building. But the original design of Anthemius and Isidore's is still the most earthquake-worthy one.
Dr. Çakmak and his high-tech computer model were proven right. Hagia Sophia withstood the greatest quake in Istanbul's history. Hagia Sophia, born of the 6th century, will continue to keep watch over Istanbul through the 21st century, as if suspended from heaven on a golden chain.